Hey guys, welcome to Neighborhood Comics in Savannah, Georgia. My name is Lee. I appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. We've got another fun show. We're going to be talking to comic book creator and sequential art professor Robert Atkins about some of his work and what he's got going on. But before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening at the shop. As a reminder, the first book in our publishing imprint is out now. So All These Perfect Crosses. This is based on the lyrics of Craig Finn from The Hold Steady and includes artwork illustrated by the amazing Andrew Greenstone. Very fun book. We are almost sold out of the deluxe editions. We still have plenty of the traditional comics left. You can order it from us direct at perfectcrosses.com. Or you can ask for it at your local comic shop. We're distributing to shops. We're in about 10 cities right now in major metro areas. So give it an ask. Let them know that you're looking for it. We have a whole wholesale channel set up to support your local comic shop. It's kind of important. We like local comic shops. That's what we do. On Thursday of this week, so in 2 days, we are debuting our live shopping channel on the Pop Shop app. So popshop.live/NBRHD Comics is where you can go to learn more about that. PopShop is an app for iOS, or it is the website that you can visit. So if you're not an iOS user, you can still participate. It's a fun live shopping format where we'll be sharing books from around the store, special stuff that we have, some things that are exclusive or back issues. We're going to have a lot of fun with it, and hopefully you can join us for that. Apart from that, we're just selling comics. We're just hanging out, doing our thing. The shop is freshly stocked. Come on in. It's been beautiful in Savannah. So if you are local, come by and see us. If you're not, you can always shop online at neighborhoodcomics.com. Follow us online at all social media platforms at NBRHD Comics. And without further ado, we're bringing in our guest today, Mr. Robert Atkins. There's going to be a countdown, Robert. 3, 2, 1. Then you're going to slide in. Look at that. This is professional.
I know, man. It's so smooth.
This is the first, and I should not say anything. This is the first show I have not forgotten to unmute someone. And the secret was I didn't mute anybody. So we were just all on our best behavior until it was time. I wasn't
chatting over here or chewing gum or something.
No, absolutely not. I love that we're coming. Is this your home office that we're at tonight?
Right. Yeah. So it was my studio with my plethora of bookshelves and statues and whatnot in the background. So I'm just actually sitting here on this is my drawing table, in fact, that we're kind of just set up at. But yeah, just here at home. I have a few different stations actually, because we're, as you mentioned, I'm teaching at SCAD. So this past few quarters, we've been teaching from home, ever since, pandemic and all, since last spring quarter. So I have my computer station over there. I've got another table with an overhead document camera I teach from, or I'm here at my drawing table, and I've got my laptop kind of set up here at my drawing table. So I've kind of taken over this upstairs room. I have 3 different stations I teach from depending on what I'm going over. And my wife will never get her craft area back again. That's why
I was going to ask if it was formerly a playroom for the kiddos or, a craft room. Gosh, yeah, no, it's yours now. I think that you can just lay claim to that.
That's it.
That is awesome. Well, I've had the privilege to get to know you a little bit through the shop. You've been a great supporter of us, and I really do appreciate not just the fact that you have a pull list here, which is super cool, but you also have brought in students in the past and have just been a great advocate for us, helping us out. And I do really appreciate that. So right off the top, I wanted to say thanks for that. I think that it's really cool that you talk to your students about supporting or having a relationship with their local comic shops. I think that's a really cool thing that, sadly, with a lot of the students, they may not have had a personal connection to a comic shop growing up. Maybe they were picking up stuff at Barnes & Noble, or maybe they were checking out webtoons, that sort of thing. So I do really appreciate you bringing that to the fore.
Well, there's a couple of things. Like I love the fact that we can just kind of walk down from class typically, and then it becomes an awesome field trip that we just literally walk down to the shop and you're so great with the students that we can walk down and I love that they get a retailer's point of view of what happens to their book after they've sent it off to the publisher, and then they just kind of wait for it to be out on shelves, like to get from another point of view, from point A to point B, what happens in between. And so, just to get a different perspective, I think that's good for them to know that side of the industry, but then also to kind of share with them that I learned kind of more in the world, more say than I learned from school. But I remember I went to a convention that was just dead slow one year, and I was like, oh, what do I do here? I wasn't really sure how to make the most of it and so that it still felt productive. And so I just went out and I just like, you know what, I'm going to get to know the retailers, the vendors here at the show, because there wasn't many customers walking around and they were just as slow as I was. And man, I just made such great friendships. I was just talking to them, like where they were from, did they have a local shop or did they just do conventions, and just made some great like lifelong friends with some of the retailers and the vendors. And with those connections, like turns out they love all the same things I love. I was like, what? and some of them enjoyed my work, which was great. And I could, do some side deals. Like I could trade, and actually that was mutually beneficial. I could potentially trade some of them like prints or artwork that I had worked on, and potentially for, turns out, like some great toys that I could just bring home for my kids, but or just when I had sketchbooks or something that they could sell in the shops, or I had product that I was producing when I had a book coming out, then I had built up a relationship with that retailer. Um, and, and then, of course, when I had new books coming out, it was that much easier for me to call them up and to say, hey, I've got a new book coming out. Can I do a store signing, or can I count on you basically to help me promote this thing? And it was obviously so much easier for them to promote a book of a creator that they know, like, and they're actually good friends with, than just some random name on a list, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
just
And
over the
that,
years,
yeah,
yeah, over the
just
years, that
as
just really helped a lot of ways.
well as a retailer, I mean, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, it is when you're local and you have a chance to get to know number one, there's just something really nice about telling people, hey, somebody who lives here makes comics. So there's just a really easy local, Savannah's a touristy town, and people are like, oh, people actually ask, well, what's local? They want to get something that has that tie, that connection to their trip or to their place or whatever. So there's that aspect of it, which is great, being able to tout that, but not to discourage artists from reaching out to shops that they aren't local to. I mean, we have gotten some really, of course, over the course of the pandemic, it's been crazy. And, artists that don't need to necessarily do outreach have been sending small shops like ours packets of materials they had developed for cons that they weren't going to anymore, just gratis. And we're like,
Right.
hey, feel free to sell these, give these away to your whatever, And now I'm just like, every time I have a chance, every time I see their name on an order form, I just double my order because I'm like, oh, this person like really cares and is really cool.
Yeah.
And they want to form those connections. So I love that you kind of teach that as a part of your, getting students ready to go out into the world. I mean, being able to pitch your work is one thing. Of course, you've got to do it to a publisher if it's your own stuff. You've got to get the work out there, but getting it in stores is not as easy, especially with a new property, as just putting it in the catalog and thinking people are going to order thousands of copies.
Yeah, I teach the students because I kind of learned it as well, but just there's a number of people, if you want to break into the industry, there's a number of people who have to take a risk on you. The publisher certainly is the one who's technically going to hire you and looks at your portfolio or looks at your body of work and thinks, all right, I'm going to take a risk and decide that they're going to get the job done and get it done on time, and that the quality of their work is going to equate to a certain number of sales, or that, it'll be a successful book. But ultimately, it's the retailer, especially in a direct market situation, that is, I think, taking the bigger risk, hands down. because they're kind of stuck with that book. You know what I mean? And
For people who don't know, most comic
exactly.
books, when you see it at your local comic shop, the vast majority of them that comic shop now owns. So
Yeah.
the magazine market is very different. Comics used to be very different from a newsstand perspective. That if books
Mhm.
didn't sell as a periodical, you could return them to the publisher or to the distributor and get a refund for those books that didn't sell, and that really put the onus on them. But after the advent of the collectible market, there was just a huge sea change in the direct market, meaning comic shops and specialty stores, where it all just shifted to, oh no, you guys are doing great. Why don't you guys just buy these? So,
Yeah.
sometimes publishers do really interesting promotional items with stores and give us the chance to make items fully returnable. Maybe we have to buy a certain number of copies first, or what meets some other benchmarks. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just, hey, we believe in this book. We think you'll sell it. And if you don't, send them back. But that is never happening with DC and Marvel. Those are your smaller
Sure.
publishers who are fighting for that shelf space, who are being
Yeah.
creative about how to get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Here, just real quick, I just want to, just so I don't cut out, but I want to check my internet just real quick. It's kind of a bit laggy on my end, so
Yeah,
I'm going to
you're good.
switch out. I don't think it'll drop me, but just to.
Oh, I'm here. Yeah, it's not going to drop you, but you're gone. There you go. You're back.
Okay.
Nope, gone. This is good. So I'm going to leave this in. I want to remind everybody that you can get our conversations, our neighborhood comics convo with creators as a podcast as well. So the best way to get that is anchor.fm/NBR HD comics. Let's see. So guys, Robert is coming back in. I have been vamping for what, 10 minutes? I don't know how long you've been gone until I realized, oh no, Robert was right. Like, I'm a blue screen on Facebook and on YouTube too. So, hey, what's up, Robert? I literally have just been, talking about the store.
Oh no, to yourself.
Solid. I have a hope, and I'll check this later. I have a hope the audio at least recorded but was going out, but just so I can laugh at myself because it was epically bad. So
it was quality stuff, I'm sure.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. Well, hard reset. We're back. Okay. Robert Atkins is our guest. Robert is a professor at SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design. Robert has worked on a number of titles, but is perhaps best known for his work on GI Joe for IDW with the great Larry Hama, writing and providing scripts for him. And I am always really curious when I talk to creators about their origin story. You know, as somebody, for me growing up, I didn't have access to a lot of comics. It was something that I knew existed and I loved the concept of, but it wasn't something that I had readily available. For you, do you remember what that first exposure to comics was?
Yeah, definitely. So it was my cousins. Well, first off, I would deliver newspapers and stuff with my brothers growing up, and there was a corner store, like a corner kind of gas station. And I remember some of the first comics I picked up was just a lot of X-Men titles. The very first comic I read was Iron Man number 254, which I happened to find at a Heroes Con, years ago. I kind of refound it, and it's an issue where Iron Man's fighting a Santa Claus on the cover, and it says "Ho ho homicide," and like Santa Claus is like shooting a gun at Iron Man, and I was like, "What's this?" It's like comic books. I was like, "This is so bizarre."
How old were you, Robert?
I was like 8 or 9, I think. Awesome. I think 9 or 10, maybe. The perfect age. Yeah, perfect age.
Homicide. Yeah.
I was like, what in the world? And it was like, that was intense. Like Taskmaster's in there, and like people die in this book. And I was like, it was like my introduction to like fictional death, this book. I was like, what? Because Taskmaster is like training these 3 potential assassins to see through this school, like assassin school, to see who would be, I forget his name now. This next villain, and it was like a legacy character, so he was gonna take on the mantle of this kind of villain, and who would graduate into this role. And anyway, I remember reading it, and I was just like blowing my mind. I didn't buy it; I just read it. I sat there and read it. I didn't. So I'm sure they loved me at that corner store. But then it was during the same time that like the X-Men. It was weird because in the late 80s, like the X-Men weren't the household name that they are now. There wasn't like a cartoon out that people knew, and there wasn't a TV show or movies or anything, even like a toy line, really. It was just the comics. But weirdly, I must have known the name X-Men because when I picked up the X-Men book, it was when they were supposedly dead, and they were like in Australia, right? And I was like, this is weird. I thought, why are the X-Men dead? So that was a weird time to pick up my first X-Men book and be like, what is going on? And it was like when Wolverine was Patch, you know what I mean? Going by the name Patch. And
I don't know that there was a good time to jump on an X-Men comic book, like apart from that era when they were doing the reprints, in the 70s.
I imagine it must have been when like, probably like Claremont, John Byrne run, is probably probably the best time if you were going to just pick up a random book, and it feel like X-Men, I would guess probably the best time. Well, at any rate, so that was when I was first introduced to comics, but I wasn't like collecting them. That was when I was just reading them for free and then running away. You know what I mean? Like before the store clerk could grab me. But it was my cousins who were like way into comics in the late 80s, early 90s who came and visited, and they showed me that this thing called, Image Comics was happening. And I was like, what's that? And I remember and a brand new comic shop had opened up in town. So until then, there was no, comic book shops in this small town I lived in. And
Where
a
was
brand
it?
new
What
one.
was the town, Robert?
It was Jacksonville, Illinois. So in
Okay.
the central Illinois, middle of nowhere, and for this great little town I grew up in, and place called Comics and More, and I was in like eighth grade, sorry, seventh or eighth grade, and the very first comics I bought with my own money, my newspaper money, was Cyberforce #2 and Supreme #1 and a Death's Head 2 X-Men crossover. And I only bought that because it had X-Men in it. And for whatever reason, I don't know why I didn't buy an X-Men book, but it had the X-Men in it. I was like, ooh, X-Men. And they're not dead. And so I bought it.
I love that. There's something that really speaks. One of my favorite things is that you are like legitimately a fan of not just comics, but like all of that pop culture of the 80s and 90s. And you can talk the talk and walk the walk with the best of them.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I just grew up in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think because, you had you're younger than me, but you had older siblings and that sort of, or, cousins. And like you said, you had other family or friends that were able to hip you to this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a lot like how people find out about music too. There's that cooler, older person that you don't see all the time who's like, oh, plays you something. You're like, oh, okay. That's a little dangerous. That's a little edgy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's ho-ho homicide.
Yeah, so it's like I was familiar with comics from the corner store.
Yeah.
But I was like GI Joe to me was just the cartoon and the toys. And what had really got me interested in story and character was definitely the cartoons of the 80s, right? So I grew up on certainly GI Joe and Transformers, He-Man, Voltron, Thundercats, all that stuff from early 80s. I was born in 79, so like like you said, I have a lot of older siblings, so not that even when GI Joe was first coming out in like 82, 83, I guess, I was only 4 years old, so it's like I have barely any memories of like the early. I do remember the early miniseries. It's some of my earliest memories was like the early miniseries, and because they came out on prime time and all that kind of stuff, but it was because it was always on. My older siblings always had it on, and I just wanted to do everything they were doing, right? Yeah. So I wanted to play with all their cool toys and anything. They were just gods to me. So I just wanted to do everything they were doing. And so, but I think that's what got me first interested in just story and unique character and everything. Say whatever you want about the 80s cartoons, and not all of them hold up for sure. But the characters are all super unique and very saturated, very interesting to look at, and they just grabbed my imagination. You know what I mean?
Well, they had to be to sell toys, right?
Oh, exactly.
I mean, to be super cynical about this, that was when regulation had all fallen off, and during the Reagan years, and you could have children's programming that was just to sell toys, and that's some of the best stuff. Because you're right, it's storytelling. And for me, I mean, of course, there were the GI Joe toys and Transformers, but Star Wars is kind of where it started for me, in that, we couldn't just watch the movie whenever we wanted to. You were lucky enough to see it on a replay at a drive-in or once a year, maybe on TV. But you had the toys to try to reenact the story or create new stories. And I think that's a really kind of overlooked piece of like where that bridge between crass commercialism and actually getting kids to think about creating in that way. Really, it's like the movie, the cartoons, they show you an example and they give you the things that you and your friends, or you by yourself in my case, would sit and actually figure out a way to do it on your own.
Yeah. No, I mean, we would definitely do that. Like we would grab all the toys and we would go, in our backyard or to the neighborhood playground, and we would dig little pits and create little, tiger traps, and like have little scenes where the Joes would go. We'd like, oh, break out the bridge layer, and we like boom, and we'd have to get everybody across because they had to go over the ravine and all this kind of stuff. I mean, we would have all these missions, and then and I just have, and then of course I wanted all this for my kids, so that, like, skip ahead, 20 years and 30 years, and I've got, I bring out all the toys and we role play all this stuff out with my kids, and we would just play out these epic stories in my studio, but because I want them to have all those same memories. But well,
GI Joe was the ultimate toy line for that, especially that playing outside piece of that. I don't know how many times I got yelled at for being in the ditch too close to the road, because that's where the big ravine was. And like you said, the bridge layer needed to lay a bridge, or how many figures were buried and then years later came up in the lawnmower.
Oh man,
they had died in the service of their country.
Exactly.
So it was sad to have their grave desecrated, but at the same time,
unfortunate.
They look kind of cool when they came out the other way
too. Yeah, so it was, I think it was a combination for me of the cartoons and the comics that ultimately led to me kind of realizing that this is something I wanted to do. Eventually, I still, I didn't realize it was something I thought was actually possible, because growing up in a small town in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't anything like YouTube or social media for me to look and see in the outer world. Like, is this something that's possible, professionally? I think nowadays you have access to professionals, and you can see people's YouTube channels, and people can demo and tutorials like, this is how you do it. It's all out there for anybody nowadays to go and find out, really. At any age, to find that and see it's possible. And I think, and I'm probably of that last generation, my age, I think, is that last generation where, unless you lived around somebody who did it professionally, there was no real path. There was no easy, I don't want to say easy way, because it's never easy, but I was just completely oblivious to even realize that it was a professional possibility. I just saw this was product that was made. I was like, this is cool. I just consumed it. It wasn't until I was in college I was like, I think this is something I want to do, but I have no idea how it's done. And then I found out that SCAD had a program, and like the Joe Kubert School had a program. But when I was deciding, at a graduate school level, I'd even gone through and I had my undergrad, but I just knew I wanted to do comics. The only two options in the country was SCAD, that had a master's degree, and the Kubert School had a certificate program. A couple of other colleges in the country had classes that focused around storytelling, like SVA in New York and Ringling and RISD, but it's not like they had a full degree in it,
So you would have been getting an illustration degree or storyboarding or something like that. Well, probably not even storyboarding, but right. Probably illustration or some other, fine art discipline.
Exactly. And then just one or two of my classes would have been about comics, but with SCAD having a full degree in sequential art, then it was really just, for me, the one school I wanted to apply to, and I did, and I went down here for my master's degree, and then that's what brought me down here. It was in 2002 to 2004. I came down to SCAD for my master's degree, and that kind of laid out the path for me. So luckily that was available, and it was a chance, and I enjoyed school. Like, not everybody does. I learned well in that environment, and I enjoyed it. So it worked out well for me, but it's not like, going to college isn't like absolutely necessary to do comics. I'm sure SCAD doesn't want me to say that, but
you're not the first professor to come on here and say that, Robert. I got to be honest.
No, I mean, it's because it's not a skill that is absolutely, or it's not a profession that says, let's see your resume and let's see your GPA or anything like that. It has everything to do with your portfolio, but it also has everything to do with how much can you learn on your own, and how disciplined are you, and what resources do you have around you. That's another big thing, because if you don't have a mentor that's at arm's length to teach you these things, then you need to go to school. I mean, ultimately, because then you have ready-made mentors lined up for you to take this class, then this class, and this class, who have done it. That's one great thing about SCAD, but there are other institutions as well. One great thing about that is these are hopefully people that have done it, and they can help you through that trial and error process. You're not doing that on your own, because that can just take forever. If you're just doing a page, the page doesn't work and you don't know why, and then you do it again to try and do the next one better, but you're doing all the pitfalls. That takes forever, to do that trial and error on your own. So you either need a mentor, which you might have, and if you do, then school might not be as necessary, or you go to school and you have that ready-made system where the mentors are there.
I think that's a really great way of looking at it, because you're absolutely right. Everybody that I've talked to over the course of these conversations that did not pursue school or did not finish school or whatever, had someone who had worked in the industry who was able to give them some trial, or, let them ink some pages, or to make a contact. Like, oh, well, let's come to my studio and I'll show you like what I do, and then starts introducing you to people, or even if it's just shopping your portfolio at a con, but it's meeting the right person who then sees that thing and then helps you get the job. And then really, once you start getting jobs, for the most part, I mean, it's not like you do still have to hustle, but then your portfolio goes from, independent work to published work. And I'm sure that makes a big difference, knowing that you can make deadlines and there's another editor they can call and ask questions.
The last comic you did becomes your best business card ultimately, because it's like, hey, I just did this. And it's definitely easier to, it's not easy, but I mean, it's easier to keep getting work than to get your first work, certainly. And to get your first work, you need a combination of quality portfolio and somebody's help. Honestly, you need somebody to vouch for you and somebody to kind of get your work in front of other people. And it's a combination of those things. But that mentor is essential. And so whether that's through SCAD or through contacts or networking, and that networking can come through conventions. Sometimes it can come through your local comic shops, because there's a lot of people who you have walk through the doors. There's times where I'm sitting there in the store, and you'll introduce me to people, or just crazy, like I'll be there and then somebody else can come in and be like, oh, hey, so and so, you're working on this book. Well, here's Robert. He's working on this book, and then we'll have 3 creators just standing there, like, oh yeah, and then we all have a conversation.
It's a surprisingly small world. Now, I know that here in Savannah, we do have the school, and I think there's a certain cachet, whether it's the cost of living or the fact that there's still some like cool downtown and different types of scenes that attract people who are cool and want to make comics, and so that's great. We're a tourist town, so people do pop in sometimes when they're around. We had Karen Berger, who was like the co-founder of Vertigo here a couple of weeks ago, and her husband. I mean, that just doesn't happen everywhere, I don't think. So that's really cool. But what you're talking about with networking, I mean, this transfers right into a question that Nicole has. Nicole was asking about a good way to network with companies, and I'm assuming publishers in this case, but it could mean licensors, or I guess any kind of work that you could move into from a sequential standpoint. A good way to network with companies, and any advice for doing that reaching out phase, that initial kind of maybe an introduction.
Yeah, it's difficult. There's I kind of find the easiest way is through conventions, and right now a lot of that's on hold. But it is, conventions themselves could be we could have an entire conversation about just conventions, which might be kind of fun to have a panel where we get 3 or 4 of us together. That could be really fun. So just a brief word about conventions, and then I'll set that aside because not everybody can make it to conventions, right? But just very quickly, the great thing about a convention is that it's a one-stop shop where you have multiple publishers and lots of companies there with the sole purpose of networking. That's why they're there. They want to meet people. They want to talk about their product, and they want to secure new relationships with people to work with for the coming year or years, in the future. So not just for immediate jobs to fill, but for people that they want to keep an eye on for potential work in the future. So that's why they're there. They're excited to meet people and to talk to people. And it's not always just going to their booth and doing it on the show floor and saying, hey, here's my book, can I leave something with you? And it being real formal and professional. It's also just a matter of, everybody has the show floor convention and then the kind of after hours convention where we all just kind of hang out afterwards. And it's usually in just the hotel lobby, and people are just kind of sick of standing on their feet at the show floor selling things. And then everybody just kind of chills out, typically at whatever the main convention hotel is. And it's just super casual and people are standing around. Sometimes there's like a convention, like art auction, or, some kind of a drink and draw activity or get together. And that's very laid back. And no matter what, whoever you're with at that show, often you'll be set up. Maybe if you're an artist, maybe you're in Artist Alley, or you'll get to know artists in Artist Alley if you're going around showing your portfolio. And even if you just kind of show up at this after hours, you'll see faces you recognize during the show. And if you kind of just walk up and, hey, how's it going? Did you have a good show? And just small talk, chances are they're talking to somebody, and then you'll be part of that conversation just through association. And then as somebody else will join that conversation. And you do that 2 or 3 nights in a row, and you'll have a laundry list of new people that you didn't know before the weekend that now you know after the weekend. And if you follow up after that show, then that's where the networking starts. And it's not a matter of pestering them, but it's a matter of just keeping in touch in general whenever you have something new and you want to talk about something.
It's so funny because it is like just general job advice. Like that is such a, it doesn't matter what your industry is.
No,
you show up, you shake hands, you smile, you want to present yourself as someone that somebody else wants to spend time with and invest in. And it just, I think I hear from a lot of artists that it can sometimes be hard to put yourself out there. It can be a very solitary pursuit sometimes. But I think the benefit of cons really is that you are in a pool of other people that are like you, that care about the same things, that maybe also, have a pretty insular working environment. And just learning how to overcome that a little bit to make those introductions and to be in front of people makes all the difference, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, and there's, sometimes there's intimidating conversations, and there are ones that are, whether it's people that you're more familiar with, those are obviously the easier conversations where you don't feel like you're just walking up to a crowd of a bunch of people you don't know. Like that feels like middle school dance. Like nobody wants to do that. You know what I mean?
I get it.
But it's so I always tell this story. I always tell this story. When I was right out of school, I went down to a MegaCon down in Orlando, and I had gotten into the after party. That it was back when CrossGen was a thing, and they were putting on this big after party, and I wasn't invited to this after party, but I knew I wanted to be there because that's where all the publishers were, all the big artists and editors were, and I was like, I need to network at this after party. And so I found out, like, how do I get in? You had to have a ticket to get in. And the only way to get tickets, there was like, you could have a ticket or you could be a +1. I was like, all right, well, I need to go make a friend real fast with somebody who has a ticket. I tried all day long to find out who had tickets. And then everybody I found out had a ticket was already bringing somebody, and I could not make a friend. It's like, dang it. So I could not, no matter how hard I tried, nobody would want to bring me. I was like, all right, well, but in my, investigating, I found out where it was going to be and what time. And I was like, I'm going to find a way to sneak into this party. So not that I suggest this, but in general. So I go to this party, and sure enough, it was just like in the movies. There was like a big club thing, and it was like a whole line, and there's a huge bouncer at the door, and it's like this velvet rope. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like what?
This is the most non-comic book person thing.
I know. I was like, what the heck is going on? And so I started walking down the line to get in, and I started looking at the line. And I was like, all right, where's a group of people who obviously have tickets? They all had tickets, but some of them obviously had a +1. I was like, who has a ticket that's standing next to somebody else with a ticket that has a +1 that doesn't have a +1? I'm sitting here like trying to logistically look at the line. I'm walking down the line one way, and I turn.
Making all kinds of judgments. Yes,
I know exactly. I'm just judging the whole line, And then so I kind of slow my roll on the way back, and then right as I'm getting close to the front door, I try to time my walk right as I come in right behind somebody who had a ticket but didn't have a +1, and they walk through, show their ticket. The bouncer's like, go. And I come in right behind that person. The bouncer looks at me. He's like, whoa. And I go, +1. And I point at the person right in front of me. He's like, all right, go ahead. I was like, and I just like go running.
There's a cloud of smoke behind you. That's
and I was like, I sneak in there. I was like, oh my gosh, I totally got in here. And I was like, all right, I got to find I walk in, I'm like, and I was in this scenario, right? I don't know anybody. I didn't go in with anybody. I was so new to the industry. I didn't know anybody. I was like, I got to find a way to network and make this like party worth it. And so I'm looking around and I was like, it's so awkward to walk up to a crowd of people who are already talking, right? You don't want to walk up and like people are laughing and then you're like, you know, and then like join in the joke that you weren't a part of. So I was like, all right, I need to find somebody who is like, you know, just by themselves, preferably alone in the corner, maybe already drunk. Like, I don't know. Somehow, like, somehow an easy catch, somebody I could just talk to, and it's not intimidating at all. And then so I look over, and turns out in the corner was Jim Chung. I was like, "Hey, Jim Chung," and I recognize him just because he's like, even at that stage, he was pretty well known. He was working on Scion at the time. He'd worked at Marvel on a book called Maverick and a number of other things. And I remember really enjoying his work at the time. And so I recognized him. I think he was in Wizard's top 10 artists or something once or twice. And I was like, oh man, he's made it. And so I recognized him. And I kind of walk up to him and I was like, hey, you're Jim Chung, right? He's like, yeah. And he was surprised he didn't know me from anybody. And I was just kind of like, hey, how's the show going for you? And he's like, oh, it's good. And I was like, hey, I saw you had a couple signings today. And he was just like, oh yeah. It's like, it was busy. And then I just kind of said, well, we were just kind of chatting about the show. Because here's one thing, a little bit of networking advice, is you are both there at the show for the same reason, right? That gives you a bit of common ground immediately, right? So it's so easy to break the ice because you both have the same frustrations and the same victories, right? So you can talk about that. Everybody likes to talk about the things that annoy them and the things that go well, right? So if you're there for the same reasons, then you have the same things to be annoyed about. So you can talk about the con-funk. You can talk about all the things like how crowded it is. You can talk about whatever. All the things that annoy you probably annoy them. And then there's just stuff that you can agree on. So we were just chatting it up. He doesn't know me. And for 5-10 minutes, got to know each other a little bit, which was really cool. And turns out he's a really nice guy. So that was nice. And then, as it turns out, Jim Chung isn't just a sad, lonely drunk. He was just waiting for his friends to show up. So this is another bit of networking advice. If you go and talk to the person who turns out to be a popular dude who's standing by himself, his friends will show up and then he'll introduce you to his friends. Nice. So sure enough, you know, like that's when like Olivier Coipel comes up and Mark Brooks comes up and all these other guys who pop in. And they're all like, hey, this is Robert Atkins. And so that's when I got to meet all those guys, which was great, kind of early on in my career. And so we chatted for 20, 30 minutes or something like that. And I didn't want to be that weird hanger on, right? So I was like, hey, Jim, I see a couple of my friends just popped in. I want to go say hey to them. Thanks for chatting with me. It's great to get to know you. That was a total lie. I had no other friends, which I proved earlier on in my story when I couldn't be a +1 for anybody. So anyway, so I said, hey, tomorrow, if you get a chance, I know you're super busy, but if you get a chance, I'm set up at this table. I'd love to get your feedback on my artwork if you have time. And I understand you're busy. And he's like, yeah, sure. If I get up, and I'd be happy to swing by. And so I want to say this too, real quick, is if an artist ever says that and they don't come by, it's not because they don't like your work. They're not just blowing smoke. Like if the conventions get crazy, like you just never know. Sometimes your time isn't your own. Like I have obligations, but at any rate, so I went and mingled and just started wandering around. And sure enough, there was a few other people I had known either from school or who also snuck in, or that I had met throughout the day, right? And so friend of a friend of a friend, I ended up having a really productive kind of after party, just chatting with people. And I'm not the most extroverted person. I don't mind talking to people, but but it was productive. So then the next day, sure enough, I was at my table. And down the road, Jim Chung walks up, and I was sitting at my table. Of course, if you're at a show and another professional walks up, you stand up and just to show be respectful and everything. And he took like 45 minutes critiquing my work, which was just awesome. And it's some of the stuff that I still use on every page I draw. It's stuff I share with my students in every intro class I teach. It was just a phenomenal opportunity. So, and I keep in touch with him, and he's a good friend. So it's just a good opportunity that I made from that one kind of networking chance, and that I wouldn't have had, if I wasn't there.
Well, that's really beautiful too. And I think that the being open and appreciative and being like a sponge when people, who are it doesn't even have to be at a different level than you are at that point, but just anyone who wants to offer you help in the form of criticism or in the form of encouragement or whatever it may be, saying yes to that and saying thank you at every opportunity. Like you said, like there has to be a bit of humility to that process, which all art students who have been through a critique know that it's not always the easiest to have your peers and your professors dress you down in front of a crowd. But that sort of thing, it's this is what you want to do. This is where you want to go. And so that's who you listen to. That's really, but I do have to say, Diana jumped into the comments and said that Robert draws panels and melts hearts fandom wide. So the fact that you were not able to find a +1, I think, is really fun to everybody.
No, I'm just a nerd. Diana, she's great. So Diana, she's one of just #1 GI Joe fan. She's awesome, and actually, she's in the credits of the GI Joe run we just did. So she is such a phenomenal help with the GI Joe community. We continually drew in GI Joes that had already died.
Yes. So let me do the setup for this really quick. So
yeah, sure.
Robert recently completed a run for IDW's GI Joe: A Real American Hero. It was 10 issues, correct?
Yeah.
10 issues that every GI Joe that is currently in continuity appeared somewhere in this run. Did I phrase that right?
Well, that was the goal. That was the ambition. I don't think we hit it. And I think there's a good podcast called Talking Joes that I really like, and they do a good breakdown of this run of books. They've been reviewing all of the Real American Heroes since the first issue. So they're obviously the recent podcasts that have come out have reviewed these runs, and they actually went through and counted every Joe and found out every, because there are fans out there that are willing to do the work. You can bet.
Bless them all. Yes.
And they had a checklist, and I'm positive we didn't do it, but and so they held our feet to the fire, and they'll call us out. Which I was on the show and I did an interview with them about the process, and they were like, "Hey, so on this page, did you mean to draw them incorrectly this way, this way, this way?" And I was like, "No." So they were. They were brutal, which was great.
On the positive side, this brings us to Diana, who was a help to you.
Yeah. So well, that was the claim early on, and when they approached me with the job, is like, we want to draw every living GI Joe that is in continuity for this 10-issue run. And I was like, oh my gosh, I would love to do that. That sounds like this awesome opportunity. And so as we started going, then I would get a script that has like this laundry list of Joes they would want to put into a scene, and I just would start drawing. And I was kind of just assuming that all of these Joes were still alive. And as it turns out, like, sure enough, within the first couple issues, I was drawing, Crankcase and, just Crazy Legs and a few other Joes that were long dead, from issues way back, and
were those in the scripts from Larry, or were those notes from IDW or Hasbro? I mean, how did that?
Yeah, they were just writing the script. I mean, they just kind of slipped Larry's mind, just from, back in the day. It's like 30 years ago. So
yeah, he doesn't remember being killed.
Exactly. So, when those first couple issues came out, and sure enough, there's these characters all back from the dead, then the fandom lets us know about it real fast. And I don't know, to be honest, Diana, if she's still in the chat, can let us know. I don't know if it was Larry who reached out to her, or if it was IDW that reached out, or if she offered her services. But at any rate, to IDW's credit, they recognize, hey, there's somebody who could keep up with this or knows it better than we do by heart. And because there are fans out there who are just phenomenal at this. And and recognize
that's why
that.
Star Wars has, you know, Pablo Hidalgo, like the keepers of the holocron, who are able to, they're the guy that when you're doing a comic or a movie or a TV show or a novel that you have to run everything by, because he's like, no, they're dead. You can't do that.
Oh gosh. Yeah. So yeah, Diana came in and Larry would finish the script, and then Diana would look over it. And sure enough, if there was somebody who was in the script that had died, then Diana would be like, well, so-and-so's dead, but here's 3 or 4 other Joes that have either similar skill sets, or you could use so-and-so because we haven't drawn them yet, you know, to check off another name off the list, which was so crazy helpful. That was so great. She did awesome.
What a cool gig to be GI Joe consultant. Diana is still with us. IDW reached out to her on what she was told was Larry's recommendation.
Oh, great.
It was like a wish come true. Thanks, Diana.
Yeah, so Diana is, I mean, she's at all the Joe conventions, and, you know, I've been friends with Diana for quite a while. So I've met her at, I think, at JoeCon years ago. And of course, Larry's at a lot of those shows. And so we all tend to get to know each other pretty quickly at these. You know, the great thing about GI Joe in particular is, you know, I grew up on the show especially, and then I found out years later that there even was a comic.
Yeah.
And then I went back and read the comic. And then as I got to work on the comic is when I started rebuying a lot of the toys and kind of got back into the fan base. And I found out there was all these forums, and I was just so excited to get back into the fan base through that, getting to work on it again. And then I found out that there was conventions like specific to Joe, like there was JoeCon for a long time.
And that one's in Augusta, correct? Or
there was JoeCon that was run by the same company for a while that was running BotCon, and wasn't quite licensed through Hasbro, but just had to deal with Hasbro to do the subscription service figures.
Yeah.
And that ran for a long time, and then kind of folded or stopped a few years back. And then, so now there are more regional shows that have been popping up. And there's like CoilCon in the Midwest, and there's a few others that are really great. The one in Augusta is awesome. It's so fun. It's run by a good friend, Ed Schumacher's. So it's called Joe Fest. So that's in Augusta, Georgia. And so I think it's coming up on its third year. Yeah. And that's been a blast, because like Ed, when he was first kind of thinking of the idea of doing it, kind of reached out, and I've been working with him. I mean, it's really his baby. He's doing all the hard work, certainly. Yeah. Hands down, it's all him, but him and his family. But I was able to kind of advise him a little bit on just like, well, you know, here's some suggestions. My sister runs conventions and, you know, co-owns a few conventions. And I've been to a lot of them. So I was able to help advise on a few things and help out and provide some art with some stuff. And so that's exciting to see that grow. And obviously it's done so well because there's just such a awesome, tight-knit community. I went to the JoeCon was interesting because it would travel from city to city. It was never in the same city. Well, I mean, maybe after a few years it might come back, and I went to the first one I went to was the one in Providence, Rhode Island. And I did gangbusters. I did so well. I did better at this one little show. And of course, that's the headquarters of Hasbro.
Yeah.
But I did better at that show as far as like selling stuff off my table than I would do at like a New York Comic-Con or San Diego. I was like, what?
But it was like concentrated.
I know.
They were there to see you, Robert. It was just you and Sergeant Slaughter, and they were there for both of them.
Well, I was set up next to Larry Hama, and it was like, and IDW was there. It was one of the few shows that they did. And I was like, wow, like JoeCon is phenomenal. And I thought, and then the next year it was in Orlando, and I was like, all right, here we go, JoeCon, here I come. And then I went to that show and I realized, oh wait, these are all the same people. Like,
they already bought your prints and your sign.
I know, exactly. I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. Yeah, they bought all my product the year before, so the only thing they bought the next year was anything I had new. And I was like, oh, I got to do every other year kind of a thing. And I have to build up new inventory. Like, so I didn't know how this was going to go down.
That is great. Nicole is still watching with us. Nicole, missed conventions and critiques, both of the best. And so helpful. Yeah, for sure. It's been a hard year. I've had the chance recently to do several virtual conventions. And honestly, they have been better than I anticipated. I think for, being able to drop in and drop out, because I have jobs, I'm doing other things, but when I have time, it's not like I had to travel someplace. So I wasn't able to give it all of my focus. But those breakout sessions, getting a chance to, in the case of Comics Pro, talk to other comic retailers, to talk to publishers, to talk to artists and writers, even though it wasn't as immersive as being there in person, in a way you kind of got more of a one-on-one because of just the nature of video and how that works. Like you take up the frame when you talk, and that's who everyone is listening to. And so there were some real benefits to that. So while I don't think that would ever supplant a real in-person convention, especially from the artist or the vendor standpoint, if you have the opportunity to do any kind of networking like that with other artists or publishers or editors or whatever it may be, do it. So one of the things that you do at SCAD that I hear such great things about from the students is working to bring both talent and publishers to campus traditionally, and to be able to have students pitch and have students show their portfolio. How has that worked this year? Because you still were able to do that, but you did it virtually, right?
Yeah. In fact, the year in 2019, we did I got to give a lot of credit to Kirsten Pointer. She's our career and alumni success advisor for the sequential art department.
Kirsten is awesome.
Yeah, she's phenomenal. She works so hard for the students. It's her full-time job to help our students find work after graduation and just to help set them up for success after they graduate. Which is great because that position wasn't even around when I was a student. I was like, oh man, we could have used you back in the day. So, which is great. It's a good resource for the students now. And she, typically we would have 5 to 7, editors come down in the spring, and we run what we call an Editors Day event. This event has been going on for 25 plus years now. It's the longest running event at SCAD, yearly annual event, which is great considering that the sequential art department is that old at SCAD. They were that ahead of the game, and that they were doing this for so long, bringing in publishers to look at student work, and having such a history of that. But we're still limited to financially. You're paying for travel and cost and accommodations, and we bring in 5 to 7 just from around the country. Various publishers and editors to either put on a workshop, to do a big panel, talk about the industry, and then ultimately to do portfolio reviews and look at student work. Right, that's the goal of the week. For this event in particular, well, in 2019, Kirsten said, "Well, what if we open it up to some kind of a virtual platform, so that we could have more than just those 5 to 7, because we have some." We had a company, Webtoons specifically, is based in California, and they wanted to provide about 4 or 6 editors to look at portfolios, but we obviously couldn't bring in 4 editors from the same publisher. So they're like, well, we could just look at stuff virtually if we could set up some kind of platform or format. And we just did it through like Skype or something. I think at the time we didn't have Zoom, and so we actually made that work a year before everything went virtual, and we were able to trial run it just by chance, just because we were trying to be innovative and try to work it out. And we had I think 10 companies that year in total, and so that really set up the platform so that this next year we had to go virtual, obviously in 2020, and we obviously spring break. Our entire quarter, everybody went virtual. We didn't have anything on ground. And the spring of 2020, SCAD's Editors Day was the only publishing event in North America.
That's amazing.
Hands down. That blows me away. And I didn't actually know about that until about not a full year, but later on around December time, it was Scholastic that told us that, and said that they are actually scheduled to do a bunch of different things, and everything canceled across not just the country, but in Canada, across Mexico, everywhere. In North America, everything was canceled except SCAD's Editors Day, which we were able to put on as a fully virtual event where we had, I think, 14 different editors were able to be represented and look at student work. And we still did various workshops where they could talk about how to be an editor, how to present your work, how to put pitches together. Very informative stuff. So that was pretty great. And we were excited about that. It ended up being a ton of work, but it all got done and it was really good for the students. So this last winter quarter, we did a virtual, what we call a comics art forum, where each year we bring down professionals in various aspects of the industry. We try to spread it out so it's not just, mainstream comics. We definitely try to get book market graphic novels of varying, young adult, middle grade, all ages. We try to get we do get mainstream comics. We had Yannick Paquette this last year. We had David Peterson, the creator of Mouse Guard.
Yeah.
We had some webtoons and online content creators, and then we'll try to bring in either concept artists or storyboard artists or board game artists. People who take the skills we learn in the sequential art department, but then also show that you can spread it out into other aspects of the entertainment industry. We had a guy who's a former SCAD graduate, Chaz Moneypenny, which does not sound like a real name, but
it sounds like a great name on a comic book.
It sounds like a James Bond name. I wish that was my name.
Yeah, it's taking up half of the masthead there. That's the only thing he's got to think about. Just his last. Oh, he's probably
exactly Chaz Moneypenny. That's the comic book title. I just can't even.
That's
anyway.
Exactly right.
So he's the lead creative director for story for Universal Studios in Japan. So and he graduated from SCAD's sequential art department. And every year we do a Tokyo trip. They spend 3 weeks in Tokyo, and they went to Universal Studios in Tokyo and was like, I want that job. And just from that experience was able to be like, okay, what do I need to do to get that job? And then turns out a lot of the skills we learn in the department lend itself to creative storytelling, to apply to that, which is great. So we do our best to try and show the students that it's not just day in and day out. You got to be chained to the table drawing comics. Like, if you want to do that, great, but there are other ways to use the skills of storytelling, throughout the industry, or many different industries. So we were able to put that event on virtually because we've been teaching, through Zoom and lots of other platforms, and still had a productive event. But what's pretty amazing is because we've kind of gotten our feet wet with the virtual platform, the Editors Day event this coming spring. I don't want to say it's gotten out of hand, but
and Hunter is Hunter helping you with this? Are you giving out? Yeah,
I would not have been able to do this alone. Hunter, I'm so excited that Hunter's on board. He's so organized and helpful. So Hunter and Danny is helping as well, and she's a professor. They're a professor with digital communications and a published author, which is great. And so they're going to be helping as well. And then of course Kirsten's on board, and we have our peer tutors, Sarah Davidson and Audrey Meeker. And so we've got a big committee, which we're going to need, because as of right now we have 18 confirmed publishers, and I think nearly 30 confirmed editors from those different publishers who are going to be doing panel discussions, portfolio reviews, and it's just blown up. I mean, we've got, companies that have never been down before. So Valiant is going to be, and Marvel, DC, all the way down through, just all through the ranks. So we're really excited. And a lot of our staples, which is great. We've got Random House, one of the biggest publishers, Scholastic, biggest publishers for book market stuff. But importantly, we also have a lot of smaller creators or publishers that are very, very likely to pick up, student work who are breaking into the industry. It's a good opportunity for them to kind of get a foothold. And like, I don't know if we were talking about this right before we started or right at the beginning of our talk, but just, just to get those first couple of things published is important to show that you can do it, right? And then so importantly, we're bringing those publishers in as well. So.
Well, I want to take it back to GI Joe for a little bit before we wrap up here. You've been so generous with your time tonight. You mentioned that you worked on GI Joe previous to this run. You had quite a bit of history with the property, with IDW's, their publishing history with GI Joe. As someone who grew up as a fan of the franchise, as a fan of these characters, what was the process for you to get that specific job? Do you remember what those kind of building blocks were to get into that door?
So for me, my relationship with GI Joe specifically, kind of serendipitous in a way. I graduated from SCAD and was getting work doing it was a combination of going through school and then getting a bit of that mentoring through a connection I had made from a professor who introduced me to an artist. And I was just doing like background work for them on X-Men and a number of other, a few other guys in that studio in North Carolina. So I was doing fill-in inks and fill-in backgrounds on various books that they were working on. But then one of the SCAD graduates that I graduated with became an editor at Devil's Due Comics, a publisher from a while back, who had the rights to GI Joe at the time. This was back in 2005, I think. And
yeah, you're absolutely right. I totally forgot they had that. There was a window that was Devil's Due. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, or this is probably around 2006, I think, or 2005 to 2006. So I graduated 2004, and this guy I graduated with had become an editor, like an assistant or interned, and then became an assistant editor at Devil's Due in that interim while I was doing all this side production work for other artists. And he called me up and he just said, and I was like, "Hey, Mike, how's it going?" And I thought he was just calling to catch up. And he goes, "Hey, I'm doing great. You want a job?" I was like, "What?" So yeah, I always tell my students, I was like, "Look, the people that you're in class with, you're not in competition with each other. You guys are becoming a professional network, a peer network." And it's the same thing whether you're in school or not. Like the people you're going to conventions with, like you're not in competition with each other. You are a peer network with whoever you sit down next to. You're in peer networks with whoever you're walking around the convention with whoever you communicate with on Twitter or on social media. You become a peer network, and it's you're there to lift each other up ultimately.
Did he know that you had an affinity for GI Joe already, or was that just an added bonus?
No, that was just a bonus. I think he grew up on GI Joe and he loved it. And then he was just reaching out because he knew I had a fairly mainstream style, and he knew that in school I was relatively fast and could turn in my work on time, and that was ultimately I think why he thought of me. And then so he reached out, and I did Snake Eyes Declassified was the very first book I ever did, a solo book that had my name on the title that I got to do fill-in pencils for. And
forever linked to Snake Eyes.
I know, it was I couldn't believe it. I mean, I totally lucked out. That was my very first book, and it was
it could have been Shipwreck, man. It could have been Shipwreck, Lost at Sea, and
I know. It could have been
never heard of Robert Atkins again.
I know, exactly. So I did that. I did a Dreadnoks Declassified issue. I did some fill-in, and then Tim Seeley was penciling a lot for GI Joe at the time, so I inked over Tim Seeley a lot. And then we moved over to a lot of, they were doing Forgotten Realms, Dungeons and Dragons stuff, because they had the Hasbro license for that. And so I inked a lot of Forgotten Realms books for a couple of years. And then they were doing the GI Joe World War III arc. That was the last major arc that Devil's Due had, and I was doing covers for those, but I was never quite like penciling the GI Joe run. So, and then they lost the licensing, and I knew about 6 months before they lost it that they were not going to renew the licensing, and that IDW was going to get it. And I just remember thinking, well, so much for GI Joe. Like, I guess that's done. And I remember very specifically thinking, well, whoever gets to draw GI Joe, I hope they do a good job. Yeah. Like, and I just remember specifically thinking that, and I look forward to reading it, but they better do a good job. And I just remember thinking that very specifically. And then I had done some character designs for the World War III project and posted those on DeviantArt back in the day when that was a thing. And It was just a gallery online. And in the interim, I was finishing up some stuff for Devil's Due, again on Forgotten Realms, and I was penciling the interiors for this last arc for them. And then I got a message through DeviantArt that said, hey, I'm an editor at IDW, and I was curious if you'd like to try out for the GI Joe book here at IDW. And I was like, are you kidding me? Yes, definitely.
Did they know about the Devil's Due work already?
No, they were oblivious.
It's
So
just
I was like,
circling you.
I was like, what? Yes, please, yes. And so it was actually Denton Tipton was an editor at IDW. It was his very first editorial job. He had come from, I think, newspaper editing or magazine editing, and he had never, ever put together an art team, ever. So this is his first time ever putting together an art team. And he had literally just went on DeviantArt and typed in the search bar GI Joe. And the first thing that popped up was my character designs for the World War III stuff. I think they were called the Plague. So the character designs I did, and they looked enough like GI Joe, but they weren't any of the main GI Joe characters. They were like these auxiliary bad guys. And he goes, these look like GI Joe. I bet he could draw GI Joe. He didn't even know that I had worked on it before.
Amazing.
I think if he had known, I probably wouldn't have gotten the job. But he didn't.
They wanted to have a clean break and a fresh start. Yeah.
Yeah. So he didn't know I had worked on any of the covers or anything. And then so I go, yeah, what do you need for a tryout? And he just said, just draw like a few of the main characters, like Snake Eyes, Destro, Cobra Commander, Duke. And so I did like 6 character designs, not like model sheets, not turnarounds, no pages, just 6 character designs. And then he wrote back, he goes, looks great. Here's the script. And it was an issue 0 script from Larry. Wow. And I was like, what? I've got the job.
Oh my God.
I didn't even turn in any pages. There was no proof that I could tell a story. I'm like, okay. He kind of lucked out that I actually knew how to tell a story. And I just jumped right into it. I was like, I got to draw these pages before they change their mind.
Yeah.
And so I started drawing I was like 3 pages into it. And then I found out that Andy Schmidt had just gotten hired on as the senior editor at IDW, and that Denton Tipton had gotten shifted and moved over to work on a lot of the special or licensing projects through Paramount and BBC. So he became the Doctor Who editor and the Star Trek editor and a number of other things. So, and Andy had become a senior editor, and he had been coming from Marvel. Like Andy had worked on like Marvel's Civil War and Winter Soldier and Annihilation and Secret Invasion. You know, he had, I mean, obviously had a pedigree of huge events at Marvel. So he knew what he was doing. And then he said, well, who's this Robert Atkins guy?
Uh-oh.
and I think, to be honest, if I wasn't in place, if Denton hadn't found me and put me in place and actually told me I had the job, there's no way Andy would have hired me. Because Andy wouldn't have known me from anybody. And he certainly wouldn't have been looking on DeviantArt to find an artist. So that was just complete serendipity that, you know, I just lucked out. However you want to look at it. I was just right place, right time.
Now get picked off of Instagram and Twitter all the time. So
well, that's true. Nowadays, yeah, it was basically the equivalent of that. But so Andy was looking at my pages, and he had a couple issues with them, which he emailed me and said, all right, can we change this and this? And I said, yeah, sure. Which he liked that I was so willing to just go back and revise and redo something, that I was amiable to, you know, that I wasn't like, no way, man. You know, I was just willing to be easy to work with. So I made those quick revisions and did it. And then they decided to split the launch of GI Joe. So this is IDW's big launch. I was the main artist on their main title, and I was a nobody. Like, nobody knew who I was. And so they're like, you know what? We're going to actually take the main book and split it into 3. They were going to do, Larry Hama was going to do a book called Origins. They brought in Chuck Dixon, and I was going to do the main GI Joe title. And they brought in Mike Costa and blinking on the book called Cobra. So Mike was co-writing it with somebody. Shoot, I forget now off the top of my head. But so they split it into 3 books, and they had 3 very different tones. You know what I mean? Like the style of the book was very different. And So I mean, the script I had, that was, I missed my chance to work with Larry. You know what I mean? So they pulled Larry off, and so I was working with Chuck Dixon, which was ended up being awesome.
Great.
I loved
Yeah.
Chuck. And then this was like in the late spring, early summer that all this was going down in June, and then it was July, and I went out to San Diego Comic-Con, and IDW is based out of San Diego. And Andy says, "Hey, let's have a lunch meeting." I was like, "Oh, great. I get to meet my editor. I'm super pumped. I just got my new script from Chuck. I'm ready to go. I want to show him my layouts." And so we go and have this lunch meeting. And he was kind of saying, "Okay, well, these are the things that," he goes, "Well, what do you think about this new direction?" And we have this conversation. And I'm just like, "All right, this is the way I want to do." And I'm so pumped. I'm so excited. And I'm having this conversation with him. He was okay. All right. Well, cool. Show me your layouts. And we talk. And I just thought it was a really great, fun business lunch. What I find out years later was Andy set up that lunch to fire me. I did not.
Enthusiasm did not allow that to happen.
I think I just like won him over with my charm and enthusiasm. I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I was just like, yeah, I think he had changes for me, and I was so willing to make those changes. And I was just kind of like, all right, let's do this. I was just like, let's make comics. I was so pumped. And he was willing to give me a shot. And I think just, obviously if I wasn't, easy enough to work with or good enough, then he would have let me go, certainly. But I think it worked out. And
be someone that people want to work with. That is just what I hear over and over again. It's like, there are so many things that are okay to slide, like obviously there are things that you have to do, but as long as at the end of the day, the people that you're working with enjoy working with you. Of course, you've got to do the job and everything else, but that seems to make such a difference. So you had that, but this idea of coming back to the book after a break, 10 years, was it a decade? Like it was a while.
So I started that summer. I started with Chuck Dixon, was 2008, and we worked on it all through the fall just to get ahead. And then in January 2009, it launched. And then I was on that book like for an arc, and then somebody else would do an arc, and I would come back and do an arc. So I was on that book for about 4 years, like on and off, but steadily drawing the book for about 3-4 years. I worked on the main title, then I worked on Snake Eyes for a long time. I had drawn over 100 covers for the book.
Wow.
So I was on it for a long, long time. And then I had left Snake Eyes to work on a graphic novel with Larry called Shadow Gambit, which was just a whole other side property. About that time too, is 2012, I think. I was doing a lot of work with toy package art and like the Nerf guns, and I was doing a lot of work for Marvel then. That's when I started doing, like, I worked on Amazing Spider-Man and Venom, and some the Ultimates line was going on. So I did Ultimate Fantastic Four. And anyway, so Marvel was giving me more work. I did Castle for like a year. It was based on the TV show. And so I kind of moved away from doing stuff with IDW. Not that we ever had any like falling out. It was just that they just had other work for me. And occasionally I would still pop back, and I did like a one-off issue here or there. I'd still do stuff for IDW. Like Andy had left at the exact same time. So it just seemed like an easy time for me to leave.
Yeah.
I think Chuck was leaving about the same time. It was just that time had just kind of played out. So then for this last run, this 10-issue run, they reached out to me January of 2019. And so that would have been 10 years from the January 2009 when the first book had come out.
Got it.
And they said, "How do you want to do a 10-issue run? We want to showcase every GI Joe that's living." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that'd be awesome!" Now I just pitched to them to do some kind of a smaller graphic novel, either like a one-off or a annual or semi-annual, something. And we pitched an idea, and they came back and said, "How about a 10-issue run?" And I was like, "What?"
Was that pitch with Larry, or was that something you put together separately?
No, it was with someone else. And I wouldn't mind doing that. And that seems like it would fit in my schedule better. When they said, "Do you want to do 10 issues?" I was like, I have a full-time job. Like it's hard enough to keep a monthly deadline when that's all you do full-time. And they're like, well, I was like, well, I'd love to try it. I want to do it. It would be a chance for me to work with Larry. It would be a chance for me to work on a real American hero, which I had never done before. Everything I had
Cool.
done was some kind of like IDW verse, So for all the reasons, this was something new. It was the one thing I hadn't done was a big collected book. And that was the one thing in my career I still wanted to do. And I still didn't quite do it, which is, I really wish. I wish I could have, but just scheduling, that wasn't going to be possible. So we got a few issues into it, and we realized that it just made a lot of sense. We had Neto Diaz come in, who's a phenomenal artist, and I really loved working with him and collaborating with him. So I did 6 issues out of the 10, and he did 4 issues. And then on the last issue, which is a big oversized issue, he did the last 10 pages, which made a lot of sense for him to kind of come in and wrap that up. So it all meshes together really well, I think. And so that's kind of how we worked out the 10-issue run. But yeah, it was a great chance for me to kind of come back onto the property like 10 years after the fact that I first started. But it really kind of felt like riding a bike again. Like it was just.
Well, it's not like you stopped drawing Snake Eyes in the last few years.
Well, that's true. I mean, I draw him all the time, for commissions and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Snake Hunt is collected in GI Joe, A Real American Hero, Volume 24. I'm telling people they can just jump on here. There's no reason to pick up volumes 1 through. I mean, pick them up, but you don't have to. Pick up this one. This is what I'm telling people.
It's pretty self-contained, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, if you have a familiarity with GI Joe, there's going to be lots of fun stuff for you to pick out and to find and to enjoy. I've seen here at the shop a real resurgence in GI Joe, the Marvel years back issues in particular. There is a delightful 9-year-old girl who lives just a few blocks away, and she and her dad are coming in and building their collection of Marvel 80s Joe books, and it is
that's cool.
The coolest thing. I have a secret stack where I pull through other people's when we buy collections that they let her have first dibs on at this point.
Oh, that's awesome.
We had a collector down from visiting from North Carolina last week, and he was asking, I was like, I'm trying to build up my Joe collection. What do you have? And I'm like, just what's in the bins. Secretly, I'm hoarding them all for the super sweet kid. It is, 10 issues. It's a substantial volume. You're getting a lot for your money here. And bonus, if you order through the links in the chat there, Robert is kind enough to sign these copies for us too. So very, very cool. I do want to bring Diana back in really quick and just clarify that I was not making fun of Shipwreck. The fact that I remember Shipwreck means that I too love Shipwreck. I mean, he has the hat and the bird. I mean, it's Shipwreck. How do you?
He actually has the most lines in the cartoon.
That is a piece of knowledge that you recently did, you were doing a podcast or a rewatch during quarantine with other Joe experts, right? Wasn't that something? Did that come up then?
No, I think that's just a weird bit of trivia. I think I knew from before that too, but because I was kind of wondering like why Shipwreck was so memorable from the cartoon. And so he has actually the first, the highest number of lines, and then second is Lady J, which makes sense because you remember her also a lot from the cartoon. But yeah, so that's definitely one of them. But yeah, it was GI Joe Debriefed. We did that as a YouTube kind of show for a handful of episodes, and I think we're going to come back and do a few more just so we can wrap up the. We're going to get Buzz Dixon on, who wrote a lot of those episodes in the movie, and we're going to do a screening of the movie, which will be a lot of fun.
That's really cool. So that's something people can check out. Robert Atkins Art on Instagram.
Yep.
Handle correct. And your website is also Robert Atkins Art.
So right now, probably just through my social media is the best way to kind of see my work and to get updates on what I'll be doing coming up. So I do have a few projects that I can't fully announce. I'm doing stuff with a Hasbro project that I can't talk about. It is Joe related, I can say that, but it's we'll be able to announce it pretty soon. I'm super excited. And then I have another comic book project that will be again, we'll be able to announce pretty soon, not related to any of that, just other things. And then I'll be doing a bunch of covers for Comics Experience. And let's see. So you know, I'll be on a few kind of small things coming up, and then probably second half of the year there'll be bigger projects that I'll be able to announce.
One thing that I'm always super curious about with artists who work on licensed properties are the notes that you get back from the rights. You know, not just the notes you get from your editor, but you know, maybe everything is looking great. Then you send the pages off, and Hasbro or whoever it may be, you know, has to give an approval. Do you have a pick for your favorite or weirdest kickback? I've heard some crazy ones, so I don't know if there's one of those in the Joe world that you feel, you know, comfortable talking about of a change you were asked to make.
Yeah, it was funny. I was just talking about this with my wife actually last night, because in GI Joe, it's been interesting because it's ultimately, you deal with your editor, but then it goes up to Hasbro, and Hasbro has a licensing committee that approves every piece of art that comes through. Hasbro has to approve it. Now, you would think that it's, you know, Hasbro is the, you know, this committee behind the curtain that's going to decide, you know, whatever goes through. But you have to realize that committee is transient. You know, they come and go, like whoever makes the calls. And it was interesting when we worked for Devil's Due. I remember having to go in, and Tim Seeley was drawing the book, but I was inking on Special Missions Tokyo. It was this one-off, you know, one-shot book. And somebody in the foreground just had a gun just at rest in the foreground, you know, and because of perspective, somebody was sitting way off in the background, and the gun just at rest happened to be pointed in the general vicinity of their head, right? Just based on perspective alone. And at two ends of the room, right? And Hasbro said, we had to change it because in GI Joe, you can't point guns at other people. And we were like, what? Like, how are we supposed to draw this book if you can't point guns at other people? And we're like, do you mean their head in general or just at other people? Like, no wonder they missed each other all the time in the cartoons. Like that would be impossible.
That is really, really interesting. I just knew, because we've talked about this before, that, you know, you've had to learn all this about, you know, specific models of weapons, you know, getting all these finer points that you're going to get critiqued or dragged now online from somebody who the M16 needs an additional you know, crease here. That too. But no, just in GI Joe, they don't point guns at each other.
No. Well, but then what was interesting was, so that was at Devil's Due.
Yeah.
And then by the time we got over to IDW in the Cobra book, which were obviously 10 years past, this was just a year later in this time period from 2007 to 2009, 8, 9. Two characters get shot right in the head in panel. In panel, point blank, like shot in the face.
How are there any left?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, this one character gets shot right in the face in the Cobra book, and then Cobra Commander in the IDW verse, right?
Yeah, gets
shot and killed, and then they replace him with the new Cobra Commander. Like, that's a big part of the storyline. And I was like, there must have been somebody who changed jobs over in Hasbro to allow that, but didn't allow us to have somebody, you know, in the foreground. So like, that was an interesting changeover. In the recent run, the only 2 revisions I've ever gotten from Hasbro over, you know, I've worked on, again, I think it's at like around 30 or 40 issues of GI Joe, and again over 100 or so issue covers. I've only gotten revisions twice from Hasbro.
Wow.
The first revision from Hasbro, one time I was drawing Snake Eyes just training in a t-shirt and jeans or whatever, and he was out of uniform, he was just practicing at his master's kind of basement in a New York kind of apartment, and he was wearing a New York Yankees t-shirt. And they came back and said Snake Eyes is not a New York Yankees fan. And I was like, geez, okay.
No additional know who he is a fan of.
That was it. That was it.
We are not tying him to the Yankees.
It's like, all right. So I erased that, and I just left it blank. And then so I was like, wow, somebody on that committee is like a Red Sox fan for sure. Like they did not want anything to do with that.
Well, now we definitely have a title for this episode of Snake Eyes is not a Yankees fan.
Exactly. It's like, definitely not. So then the other one was in this issue, I think it was 269, Shoot. I think it was right when they've captured Snake Eyes and they're bringing him into the Springfield headquarters, the community center headquarters, and they're wheeling him in. You know, he's been captured, and they're wheeling him in. It's like page 5 or 6 after the helicopter's landed. The Vipers have put him on the gurney. He's like all knocked out, and they put him in a straitjacket, and he's like, they're wheeling him in. Cobra Commander's like, "Hey, Crimson Guard lady, you did a great job. Let's take him down to the vault." I think those are the exact words.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
perfect.
So then they're walking away, right? And I didn't draw this, my art, I don't draw, pinup style girls or anything like that strictly. And I'm drawing this, they're walking away from the camera. And as they're walking away, like you've got Cobra Commander walking, Dr. Mindbender walking away, and a couple Cobra Vipers, and then this Crimson Guard lady, Laura, I think 343 is her call sign. And the editors said it was fine, and I penciled it. My brother Brian inked it, and our colorist colored it, and it went all the way, it got approved. And then Hasbro said, "You gotta have to tone down Laura's butt on this panel." And I was like, "What?" They thought she was looking a little too bootylicious, I think, in that panel. Like they were like, "It's a bit too much here." And I'm like, "What? I don't draw that kind of stuff. What are you talking about?" They just thought it was a little too defined, but they didn't send it back to me to change. They just sent it back to the colorist. So the colorist just like, it just flattened it out. So if you go to that panel, there's like no definition at all. It's like the flattest butt you've ever seen. It's just wiped. Amazing. It's just totally wiped out.
And I love how they were just like, "This is the colorist problem."
I know, exactly. It wasn't kicked back to me to fix. Like they were just like, it's just gone. So those are the only 2 revisions I've ever gotten from Hasbro. Snake Eyes is not a Yankees fan, and I just draw butts like too much, I guess. I don't know.
On that note, I will say a huge thank you to Robert for being here. I really missed over the last year being able to see you and the students as much as we were able to do the year before, but I really appreciate you continuing to keep your pull up. All the support you give the shop is really, really welcome. I am I know that you are too, proud of this achievement. I mean, how cool is this, that you're able to come back to a property that you love and to do work that is really, some of these layouts, when you look at all of these characters and, how they're all defined, even if they're in the background where they're recognizable, is amazing. And I think that it has to come from a place of love to be able to get it to that point. And I love hearing you talk about this stuff as a fan, as much as, if not even more than, as of someone who helps to create it, which is really cool. We need more of that in the world. We need more Robert Atkins in the world. So
I'm doing my best.
Be sure to go follow Robert. Hey, come be one of his students at SCAD. He did a great commercial for it earlier. I'm going to make sure that I'll forward this over to the dean that he can hear. Robert, talked it up. If you don't have a mentor, go to SCAD. If you do have a mentor, don't worry about it.
I don't know.
Thanks so much for your time. I'm glad we're able to work this out, and we'll see you at the shop soon, man. Thanks, Robert.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for hanging in there with me during, I don't know if you heard me ramble for 10 minutes about nothingness. If you did and you hung out, gosh, I really, really appreciate that. A little happy tears from Nicole. Thanks so for you guys who left comments, who have picked up copies of the book, and just supporting the shop. Neighborhoodcomics.com, at NBRHD Comics on all the social media channels. This will be available as a podcast as well. You can find links to that at our website, or just search for Neighborhood Comics wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great night. And what's the more, I don't know, the GI Joe thing. They say a thing at the end of every episode. Hey, Robert. So is it, what do they say at the end of the GI Joe, or not in the PSAs? It's not the more you know. Oh, it's knowing is half the battle. I was going to get there. I brought you back just to, all right, never mind. Bye, Robert. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks so much. And we'll see you next time at the Old Comic Shop.